The moment Grace stepped into the opulent Romano estate for the anniversary gala, she felt the weight of his gaze like a brand against her skin. Lorenzo Romano stood across the marble foyer, Italian aristocracy personified in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, his dark eyes tracking her every movement with predatory focus. He was everything the whispers promised, the powerful head of the Romano Empire, feared in boardrooms across Europe, untouchable and cold as winter frost. But when their eyes locked through the glittering crowd, something primitive and undeniable ignited between them, a collision of souls that made Grace's breath catch and her carefully constructed walls begin to crack. She'd come to photograph this world, not become part of it, yet standing there with champagne flutes clinking around them and his intense stare burning through her defenses, she felt something impossible awaken deep inside her chest, something dangerous and utterly terrifying. Welcome besties, please like, share and subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. Grace adjusted her camera strap, reminding herself she was here professionally. The Romano Anniversary Gala was the event of the season, celebrating 50 years of the family's business empire. As a freelance photographer, landing this assignment meant connections, credibility, and a paycheck that would cover 3 months of rent in her tiny Brooklyn apartment. She couldn't afford to be distracted by intense Italian men with eyes like midnight. The grand ballroom sparkled with old money and new power. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across marble floors while string quartets played classical arrangements. Grace moved through the crowd, capturing candid moments. The elderly Romano patriarch laughing with business associates, elegant women in designer gowns, children in miniature formal wear chasing each other between columns. She felt him before she saw him approach. The air shifted, became charged with masculine energy that made her skin prickle with awareness. Grace lowered her camera just as Lorenzo Romano materialized beside her, 2 glasses of champagne in his strong hands. Up close, he was even more devastating. 6 feet of lean muscle, sharp cheekbones, full lips that curved into a slight smile, and those eyes that seemed to see straight through her careful professionalism to something raw and vulnerable beneath. "You've been working without refreshment," he said, his accented English smooth as aged whiskey. "That seems unjust." Grace hesitated before accepting the champagne. "I'm being paid to work, not socialize. You're being paid to capture moments." Lorenzo's gaze traveled over her face with unhurried appreciation. "This is a moment." Heat bloomed across her cheeks despite her best efforts to remain unaffected. Grace took a sip of champagne to hide her reaction, but his knowing smile suggested he saw everything. She'd photographed dozens of high society events, dealt with countless wealthy men who thought their money entitled them to her attention. But Lorenzo didn't exude entitlement. He radiated certainty, as though her presence beside him was simply inevitable. "I haven't seen you at these events before," he continued, his deep voice making her name sound like a caress. "I would remember. This is my first Romano family event," Grace replied, keeping her tone professional. "Your mother hired me through my agency." Something flickered in Lorenzo's dark eyes. Pleasure, perhaps, that his mother had unknowingly brought Grace into his orbit. He moved slightly closer, close enough that she caught the scent of expensive cologne, and something uniquely him that made her pulse quicken despite every warning bell ringing in her head. "Then welcome to our world, Bellissima." The endearment rolled off his tongue like a promise. "Though I must warn you, once you step into it, leaving becomes remarkably difficult." Before Grace could formulate a response that wouldn't sound breathless, an elderly woman approached, speaking rapid Italian. Lorenzo answered her with obvious affection, though his hand moved to the small of Grace's back with possessive familiarity that startled her. The touch burned through the fabric of her simple black dress, branding her skin beneath. When the woman left, Grace stepped away, creating distance. "You shouldn't touch me like that. People will get the wrong idea." "What idea is wrong?" Lorenzo's question was deceptively simple, but his eyes held heat that made her stomach flip. "That I find you captivating? That I have no intention of letting you disappear after tonight? These things are true, Grace." The way he said her name, with that rolling Italian accent that turned the single syllable into something sensual, made her knees weak. She'd never been touched by such concentrated male attention, never had someone look at her like she was simultaneously precious and edible. It terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "You don't know me," she managed, lifting her camera like a shield. I need to work. Lorenzo's smile turned knowing, almost predatory. Then work, Kara. But I will be watching. He was true to his word. For the rest of the evening, Grace felt his gaze following her through the ballroom. Every time she glanced his way, Lorenzo was there, talking with guests but tracking her movements, his attention never wavering even when beautiful women attempted to engage him in conversation. The intensity of his focus made her hands tremble as she adjusted her camera settings. Later that night, as guests began departing, Grace packed her equipment near the entrance. She was exhausted from hours of standing, her feet aching in heels she rarely wore, but satisfied with the shots she'd captured. The Romano family would be pleased with her work. Leaving without saying good night? Lorenzo's voice came from behind her, close enough that she felt his breath against her neck. That's remarkably rude, Miss Blake. Grace turned, finding him dangerously near, his jacket removed and top button undone in a way that shouldn't be so attractive. I didn't think you'd notice. You had plenty of guests demanding your attention. I notice everything about you. He reached out, fingers brushing her jaw with surprising gentleness. The way you bite your lip when focusing on a shot. How you avoid champagne except when nervous. That you've been favoring your left foot for the past hour because your shoes are hurting. Grace's breath caught at his observation, at the realization he'd been cataloging her quirks and reactions all evening. No one had ever paid such close attention to her, seen past her role as background photographer to the woman beneath. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Why do you care about any of that? Lorenzo's expression shifted, became almost vulnerable for a heartbeat before his confident mask slid back into place. Because from the moment you walked through those doors, you became important. I don't understand it myself, Kara, but I know with absolute certainty that you're going to change everything. The next day, Grace tried to focus on editing photos at her apartment, but Lorenzo's words kept replaying in her mind. You're going to change everything. What did that mean? How could one evening create such intense connection between strangers? Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I hope you slept well. The gala feels empty without you here. Grace's fingers hovered over the keyboard. How did he get her number? But she knew men like Lorenzo Romano had resources, connections. Privacy was probably just another thing money could buy its way around. She shouldn't respond. Should maintain professional boundaries and forget about dark eyes and promises that felt too good to be real. But her fingers typed anyway, you shouldn't contact me. Last night was business. His reply came instantly. Last night was fate. But if you need the pretense of business, I have a proposal. Have dinner with me tomorrow evening to discuss additional photography work for the family. Grace stared at the message, weighing options. She needed the work. Freelance photography was unpredictable, and the Romano connection could open doors throughout New York's elite circles. But agreeing to dinner with Lorenzo felt dangerous, like stepping onto a path she couldn't turn back from. Before she could second-guess herself, she typed, business dinner only. Nothing personal. His response made her smile despite her reservations. Everything between us is personal, bellissima. But we can pretend otherwise if that helps you feel safe. I'll send a car at 7. The following evening, Grace dressed carefully in a burgundy wrap dress that was professional yet flattering. Her dark hair twisted into a loose bun. She kept her makeup simple, telling herself this was absolutely a business meeting, and the butterflies in her stomach were just nerves about impressing an important client. The car Lorenzo sent was sleek and expensive, driven by a silent man in a dark suit who held the door open with military precision. During the drive through Manhattan, Grace tried not to imagine what Lorenzo had planned, what restaurant he'd chosen for their supposedly professional dinner. When they pulled up to a beautiful brownstone in the West Village instead of a restaurant, Grace's pulse quickened with equal parts anticipation and alarm. The driver opened her door, gesturing toward the building's entrance where Lorenzo waited on the steps, devastatingly handsome in dark slacks and a charcoal sweater that emphasized his broad shoulders. This isn't a restaurant, Grace said, staying in the car. You said dinner. Lorenzo moved closer, his expression amused. I said dinner. I never specified where. This is my home, Kara. I thought privacy would be better for discussing business. Unless you're afraid to be alone with me. The challenge in his voice sparked her competitive nature. Grace had never backed down from anything in her life, certainly wasn't going to start now just because an Italian man made her heart race. She stepped out of the car, lifting her chin with false confidence. "I'm not afraid of you, Mr. Romano." His smile turned wicked as he offered his arm. "Lorenzo, please. And we'll see about that, Bellissima. Fear takes many forms." The interior of his brownstone was stunning. Exposed brick walls, modern art, leather furniture that managed to be both masculine and elegant. But what caught Grace's attention was the intimacy of the space, how it felt nothing like the cold mansion where the gala had been held. This was Lorenzo's private sanctuary, and he'd invited her inside. He led her to a dining room where the table was set for two, candles flickering despite the early evening light still filtering through windows. The scent of Italian cooking filled the air, making her stomach growl embarrassingly. "I wasn't sure what you liked," Lorenzo said, pulling out her chair with old-world courtesy. "So I prepared several options." Grace sat slowly, processing his words. "You cooked. You sound surprised." He disappeared into what she assumed was the kitchen, returning with wine and antipasto. "My nana insisted all her grandchildren learn to cook. She said a man who cannot feed himself is not truly independent." The image of powerful Lorenzo Romano in a kitchen, learning recipes from his grandmother, was somehow more intimate than anything Grace had imagined. She accepted wine, watching him move with practiced ease as he brought out more dishes: homemade pasta, braised vegetables, crusty bread still warm from the oven. "This smells incredible," she admitted, temporarily forgetting her reservations. "Your grandmother taught you well." Lorenzo's expression softened with genuine warmth. "She died 2 years ago. Cooking her recipes helps me feel close to her still." The vulnerability in that admission cracked something open in Grace's chest. She'd spent the past 24 hours convincing herself Lorenzo was just another wealthy man used to getting what he wanted, that his interest in her was superficial and would fade quickly. But seeing him like this, cooking in his grandmother's memory, sharing his private space, looking at her with warmth instead of the cold authority he'd shown at the gala, she realized he was far more complex than she'd assumed. They talked through dinner, conversation flowing naturally despite her initial reservations. Lorenzo asked about her photography career, her family, her dreams for the future. He listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions that proved he wasn't just making polite conversation, but actually wanted to know her. "My parents think photography is a hobby," Grace confessed over dessert. Panna cotta he'd made himself. "They want me to get a real job with benefits and stability. They don't understand why I choose the uncertainty of freelance work over security." Lorenzo topped off her wine, his expression thoughtful. "Because security without passion is just a different kind of prison. I understand that better than you might think, Cara." "How?" Grace challenged, emboldened by wine and curiosity. "You have everything: family, legacy, wealth, power. What do you know about choosing passion over security?" His dark eyes held hers, serious and intense. "My father built the Romano Empire through ruthlessness. He wanted me to follow his exact path: business school, arranged marriage to unite families, running the company exactly as he did. But I wanted to modernize, change our approach, build something different. We fought for years before he finally allowed me to lead in my own way." Grace saw past the powerful exterior to the man who'd struggled against expectations, who'd fought for autonomy despite the weight of legacy. "Did it work? The changes you wanted to make?" "Yes." Lorenzo reached across the table, fingers brushing hers in a touch that sent electricity shooting up her arm. "But success means nothing without someone to share it with. I've spent years building an empire while forgetting to build a life. Until you walked into that gala and reminded me what I was missing." The raw honesty in his words stole Grace's breath. This wasn't smooth seduction or practice charm. This was genuine confession from a man who rarely allowed anyone to see beneath his controlled exterior. And God help her, Grace wanted to see more, wanted to know every layer of Lorenzo Romano until no secrets remained between them. "I've never," she stopped, unsure how to articulate the truth. "I've never been touched like this before. Not just physically but emotionally. Like someone actually sees me instead of just looking." Lorenzo stood, moving around the table with predatory grace until he was beside her chair. He offered his hand, pulling her to her feet with gentle strength. His thumb traced her jawline, the touch reverent and possessive simultaneously. "I see you, Grace," he murmured, his accent thickening with emotion. "Every beautiful, brilliant, stubborn piece of you. And I have no intention of letting you disappear from my life, now that I've found you." Grace's heart hammered against her ribs as Lorenzo lowered his head, giving her time to pull away, to stop what was about to happen. But she didn't want to stop it. She'd spent her entire life being careful, playing it safe, never taking risks that might hurt her. For once she wanted to leap without looking, to feel instead of think. Their lips met in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened into something consuming. Lorenzo's arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her curves against his solid strength while his mouth claimed hers with barely restrained hunger. Grace gripped his shoulders, drowning in sensation, the taste of wine on his tongue, the scent of his cologne, the barely leashed power in his embrace. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lorenzo rested his forehead against hers. "Tell me to stop, Kara. Tell me you don't feel this too, and I'll take you home right now. But if you stay, if you let me touch you, taste you, make you mine, there's no going back. I'll claim you completely." "I've never been touched," Grace whispered, the confession spilling out before she could stop it. "Not like this. Never like this." Lorenzo's dark eyes blazed with possessive heat, with triumph and hunger and something deeper that made her tremble. "Good," he growled against her lips. "Then I'll be your first and last. I'll teach you every pleasure, Kara, until my touch is the only one your body craves." He lifted her easily, carrying her toward the stairs as Grace's mind screamed warnings about moving too fast, about complications and consequences. But her body was done listening to logic, done being careful and controlled. For once she wanted to feel everything, to burn bright instead of safe. Lorenzo's bedroom was masculine elegance. Dark woods, soft lighting, a massive bed that dominated the space. He set Grace on her feet beside it, hands framing her face with surprising gentleness considering the barely restrained hunger radiating from his taut body. "We move at your pace," he said, voice rough with restraint. "Always, Bellissima. Your pleasure, your comfort, those are my only concerns. Tell me what you need." Grace's hands trembled as she reached for his sweater, pushing it up his torso to reveal sculpted muscle and olive skin. "I need you," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "I need everything you promised." Lorenzo's control snapped. He kissed her deeply while skilled fingers found the tie of her wrap dress, unwrapping her slowly like precious treasure. Cool air hit Grace's heated skin, but Lorenzo's hands followed immediately, warming every inch of exposed flesh with reverent touches that made her gasp. "So beautiful," he murmured against her throat, lips tracing the rapid pulse there. "So perfect. Mine, Grace. Say it. Say you're mine." "Yours," she breathed, lost in sensation as his hands mapped her curves with possessive appreciation. "Lorenzo, please." He lifted her onto the bed, following her down with barely leashed power. What followed was education and worship, pleasure and possession, as Lorenzo made good on every promise. His hands, his mouth, his body, all focused entirely on unraveling Grace until she was gasping his name, shaking with sensation she'd never imagined, claimed so thoroughly there was no part of her he hadn't touched, hadn't possessed. When she finally shattered in his arms, crying out with release that bordered on transcendent, Lorenzo followed her over the edge with a growl that sounded almost reverent. They collapsed together, tangled and trembling, hearts racing in synchronized rhythm. Grace lay wrapped in Lorenzo's arms afterward, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat gradually slow. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her shoulder, while he whispered Italian endearments she didn't need translated to understand their meaning. But as the passion-induced haze began clearing, reality crept back in with cold fingers of doubt. She just slept with a man she barely knew. A powerful man from a different world who could have any woman he wanted. What happened now? Would he lose interest, having gotten what men seemed to want? Would this become just another regrettable mistake Grace made when she let emotion override common sense? The thoughts spiraled, anxiety building in her chest until she couldn't breathe properly. Lorenzo must have felt her tension because he shifted, tilting her face up to meet his concerned gaze. "Where did you go, Kara?" His thumb brushed her cheek. "You're thinking too much." "I should go," Grace said abruptly, pulling away from his embrace. I need to go home. Lorenzo sat up, confusion and hurt flickering across his handsome face. Grace, wait. What's wrong? What did I do? Nothing. She scrambled from the bed, searching for her discarded clothing with trembling hands. This was my choice. But I need to leave now. Please. She dressed quickly, fingers fumbling with her wrap dress while Lorenzo watched with an expression that made her chest ache. He pulled on pants but didn't try to stop her, though she could feel his gaze burning into her back as she fled toward the stairs. Grace. His voice followed her, deep and commanding. Look at me. She paused at the bedroom door, unable to deny that voice even as everything in her screamed to run. Lorenzo crossed the distance between them in 3 strides, hands framing her face with desperate gentleness. Whatever you're thinking right now, that I'm done with you, that this was just sex, that I'll disappear now that I've had you, you're wrong, Bellissima. So completely wrong it terrifies me. Tears burned Grace's eyes. You can't know that. You don't even really know me. I know enough. Lorenzo's forehead pressed against hers. I know you're brave and talented and scared of being hurt. I know you taste like home and feel like heaven. I know that losing you now would break something in me I didn't know existed until you walked into my life. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. Stay, Kara. Stay and let me prove this means everything. But Grace's fears were stronger than his promises. She pulled away, heading down the stairs and out the front door before he could stop her with more words or touches that made her want to believe impossible things. The street was dark and cold, reality crashing down after the warmth of Lorenzo's embrace. She walked 3 blocks before hailing a cab, forcing herself not to look back at the brownstone where a man who claimed she was his everything probably already regretted letting someone so ordinary into his extraordinary life. The next week passed in torture for Grace. She threw herself into work, accepting every photography assignment offered while studiously ignoring Lorenzo's messages and calls. He tried everything. Texts asking if she was okay, flowers delivered to her apartment, even a handwritten letter that arrived by messenger and sat unopened on her kitchen counter because she was too terrified to read whatever promises it contained. Her best friend Rachel finally confronted her over coffee, frustrated with Grace's obvious misery. So let me understand this. You met a gorgeous Italian man who's successful, attentive, clearly obsessed with you. You had amazing sex, and now you're hiding in your apartment eating ice cream and pretending he doesn't exist? That's your plan. Grace stirred her latte without drinking it. It's more complicated than that. It's only complicated because you're making it complicated, Rachel countered. The man sends you flowers every day, Grace. That's not the behavior of someone who used you and moved on. That's someone who cares and is probably going crazy because you won't talk to him. He's Lorenzo Romano. Grace's voice came out small, vulnerable. Do you know who his family is? The wealth, the power, the connections? I'm a freelance photographer from Brooklyn who can barely make rent. We don't make sense. Rachel's expression softened with understanding. So this is about you thinking you're not good enough for him. Oh honey, that's your fear talking, not reality. Before Grace could argue, her phone buzzed with yet another text from Lorenzo. This one was different from the others, less pleading and more direct. Your avoidance answers my question. I pushed too hard, assumed too much. I'm sorry for making you uncomfortable. I won't contact you again unless you reach out first. But know this, Bellissima, you'll always be the one who got away. Reading those words felt like a fist around Grace's heart. This was what she'd wanted, wasn't it? For Lorenzo to back off, give her space, stop pursuing her with intensity that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure? So why did his promise to stop contacting her feel like losing something precious before she truly had a chance to hold it? What did he say? Rachel leaned over, reading the message before Grace could hide her phone. Oh no. No. That's not a goodbye, that's a challenge. He's giving you space but making it clear what you're giving up. That's actually pretty smooth. It's manipulation, Grace argued weakly. It's honesty. Rachel grabbed Grace's hands across the table. Look, I'm not saying you have to marry the guy tomorrow, but maybe talk to him. Explain why you ran. Give this thing a real chance instead of sabotaging it because you're scared. Later that evening, Grace sat in her apartment staring at Lorenzo's letter. The heavy cream envelope remained sealed, taunting her with possibilities. What had he written? More promises? Angry accusations about her cowardice? Indifference disguised as politeness? With trembling fingers, she finally opened the envelope, pulling out thick stationery covered in bold, masculine handwriting. Grace, I've started this letter a dozen times, trying to find words that will convince you I'm worthy of another chance. But the truth is simple, I'm not sure I am worthy. What I am is certain. Certain that you walking into my life changed everything. Certain that your laugh makes me want to hear it every day. Certain that holding you felt like coming home to a place I've been searching for without knowing it existed. I don't care about our different backgrounds or what anyone thinks about us together. I care that you're brilliant and beautiful and brave. I care that you see past my public persona to the man beneath. I care that your absence has made my world feel gray and empty. I'm not good with vulnerability, Kara. I've spent years building walls, protecting myself, never letting anyone close enough to hurt me. But for you I'll tear down every defense. For you I'll risk everything. If you truly want nothing to do with me, I'll respect that. But if you're running because you're scared of what we could be together, then please give us a real chance. Let me prove that what we have is worth fighting for. Yours, Lorenzo. Grace read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face by the final word. This was everything she'd been too afraid to hope for. Vulnerability, honesty, commitment from a man who could have anyone but chose her. And she'd thrown it away because her insecurities convinced her she wasn't enough. She grabbed her phone, fingers flying over the keyboard before courage could desert her. I'm sorry for running. Can we talk? Lorenzo's response came within seconds. I'll be at your apartment in 20 minutes. Grace barely had time to panic about the state of her small studio or her yoga pants and t-shirt before a knock sounded at her door. She opened it to find Lorenzo looking slightly disheveled, hair mussed like he'd been running his hands through it, suit jacket missing, tie loosened. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, suggesting he'd slept as poorly as she had. They stared at each other for a long moment before Lorenzo spoke, voice rough with emotion. Tell me I didn't dream that message. Tell me you really want to talk. I want to talk. Grace stepped aside, letting him into her modest space. I'm sorry, Lorenzo. I'm so sorry for running, for not answering your calls. I was scared and stupid, Anne. He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, hands framing her face as he kissed her with desperate relief. Grace melted into him, apologizing between kisses, feeling his heart racing against hers. No more running, Lorenzo murmured against her lips. Promise me, Kara. Whatever scares you, whatever doubts you have, we face them together. But no more running. I promise, Grace breathed. I'm done running. They spent the rest of the evening talking, really talking for the first time. Grace explained her fears about their different worlds, about not being enough for someone like him. Lorenzo listened without judgment, then systematically dismantled each insecurity with patient logic and fierce declarations of her worth. You think I care that you live in a studio apartment? He gestured around the small space. This place has more warmth than the mansion where I grew up. You think I care what people say about us being together? Let them talk. Their opinions mean nothing compared to what I feel for you. Grace curled into his side on her worn couch, feeling safe for the first time since their night together. Your family, though. They'll have opinions. Your mother hired me to photograph their event. She probably has someone specific in mind for you to date. Something flickered across Lorenzo's expression. Knowledge of truths Grace didn't yet understand. My family is complicated, he admitted carefully. But you matter more than complications. We'll face whatever comes together, remember? That's the promise. The following weekend, Lorenzo insisted on taking Grace to meet his mother properly, not as the photographer, but as the woman he was dating. Grace dressed carefully for Sunday dinner at the Romano estate, nerves making her hands shake as she applied makeup. You look beautiful, Lorenzo assured her, appearing in her doorway looking unfairly handsome in dark slacks and a crisp white shirt. My mother will love you. Your mother hired me to work her anniversary gala, Grace reminded him. She probably thinks I'm completely inappropriate for you. Lorenzo's expression turned serious. My mother is protective, yes, but she also wants me to be happy, and you make me happier than I've been in years. Trust that, Bellissima. The Romano estate was as intimidating in daylight as it had been during the gala. Sprawling grounds, elegant architecture, old money evident in every detail. Lorenzo's mother, Francesca Romano, waited in an ornate sitting room, her silver hair perfectly styled, designer dress impeccable, dark eyes assessing Grace with maternal scrutiny. "Mrs. Romano," Grace said, offering her hand. "Thank you for inviting me to your home." "Miss Blake." Francesca's handshake was firm, her expression unreadable. "Please sit. We have much to discuss." Lorenzo squeezed Grace's hand reassuringly before they settled on an antique sofa across from his mother. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Francesca finally spoke, her accented English precise. "I hired you to photograph our anniversary gala because your portfolio showed talent and professionalism. I did not hire you to seduce my son." "Mama," Lorenzo's voice held warning. Francesca held up a hand, silencing him. "Let me finish. You were hired as staff, Miss Blake. Now you appear at Sunday dinner as Lorenzo's guest. This is quite a remarkable transformation in 2 weeks. You can understand my concern." Grace's spine straightened, refusing to be intimidated. "I understand completely, Mrs. Romano, and you should know that I didn't seduce anyone. Your son pursued me, persistently I might add. But if my being here makes you uncomfortable, I can leave." She started to stand, but Lorenzo's hand on her thigh stopped her. Francesca's expression shifted slightly, surprised perhaps at Grace's backbone. "I appreciate directness," the older woman said. "Too many people tell me only what they think I want to hear. So let me be equally direct. My concern isn't that you're inappropriate for Lorenzo, Miss Blake. My concern is that you don't understand what being with him truly means." "Then explain it to me," Grace challenged. "Because so far all I see is a man who's kind, intelligent, hardworking, and devoted to his family. If there's something terrible I should know, I'd rather hear it directly than through gossip." Francesca studied Grace for a long moment before her expression softened almost imperceptibly. Lorenzo's father had very specific ideas about how business should be conducted, who Lorenzo should marry, what his future should look like. Much of our family wealth comes from these old arrangements. Business partnerships built on personal alliances, marriages designed to unite families and resources. "Mama, Grace doesn't need to hear ancient history," Lorenzo interjected, tension evident in his shoulders. "She does if she's going to be part of this family," Francesca corrected. "Your father arranged an engagement before he died, Lorenzo. You know this. The Giordano family expects." "I don't care what they expect." Lorenzo's voice turned hard, dangerous. "That arrangement was father's plan, not mine. I never agreed to it." Grace's stomach dropped. "You're engaged? Lorenzo, you didn't tell me." "I'm not engaged," he said firmly, turning to face her. "There was an informal understanding between families years ago, before I became head of the company. It has no legal standing, no actual agreement. I've made it clear to the Giordanos that I have no intention of marrying Valentina or anyone else they have in mind. But they still expect," Francesca began. "I don't care what they expect," Lorenzo repeated, his hand tightening on Grace's. "Grace is who I choose. Grace is who I want. The Giordanos can be disappointed." The fierce certainty in his voice should have been comforting, but Grace's mind was already spiraling. An informal engagement to another family, expectations she was disrupting, complications she'd walked into blindly. This was exactly what she'd feared, being dragged into a world where she didn't belong, creating problems for Lorenzo with his family and business associates. "I need some air," Grace said abruptly, pulling her hand from Lorenzo's grasp. "Excuse me." She fled before either Romano could stop her, escaping through French doors onto a terrace overlooking manicured gardens. The afternoon sun was warm, but Grace felt cold, her mind racing with implications she should have considered before getting involved with Lorenzo. He followed within seconds, his expression equal parts frustrated and concerned. "Don't let my mother's warnings scare you away. The Giordano situation is manageable." "Is it?" Grace turned to face him. "Because it sounds like you're supposed to marry this Valentina woman to keep business relationships smooth. What happens when you refuse? When you choose me instead? Does your family lose money? Lose connections? Lose power?" "I don't care." Lorenzo moved closer, hands gentle on her shoulders. "Let them lose whatever they want. I'm not losing you over business politics. But your mother cares, Grace countered. Your whole family probably cares. How long before they start resenting me for causing problems? How long before you start resenting me for the same reason? Lorenzo's jaw tightened with frustration. You're doing it again, creating problems that don't exist, assuming the worst instead of trusting what we have. I'm being realistic. Grace's voice rose with emotion. You come from this world where marriages are business arrangements and family legacy matters more than personal happiness. I come from a world where my biggest concern is making rent. We don't fit, Lorenzo. We fit perfectly, he growled, pulling her flesh against him. Everything else is just noise, complications that can be managed, problems that can be solved. But only if you stop running every time things get difficult. Before Grace could argue further, the French doors opened and an elegant young woman stepped onto the terrace. She was beautiful in that effortless way wealthy Italian women seem to master. Designer dress, perfect hair, confident stride. Her dark eyes assessed Grace with cool interest before turning to Lorenzo with familiar warmth. Lorenzo, darling. Your mother said I'd find you out here. Her accented English was cultured, educated. We need to discuss the quarterly reports before tomorrow's board meeting. Grace felt Lorenzo tense against her. His arms dropping but staying close enough to maintain possession. Valentina. I didn't know you were coming today. So this was Valentina Giordano, the woman Lorenzo was supposed to marry, the arrangement his father had made. She was stunning, poised, everything Grace wasn't. And the way she looked at Lorenzo suggested she had no intention of accepting his rejection gracefully. Your mother invited me for Sunday dinner, Valentina explained, her gaze flickering to Grace with barely concealed disdain. She thought we should discuss family matters before the wedding preparations begin in earnest. There are no wedding preparations, Lorenzo said firmly. I've made my position clear to both our families. Valentina's laugh was musical, condescending. Oh, Lorenzo, don't be dramatic. You're just going through a phase. Testing boundaries before settling into your responsibilities like a good Romano heir. Everyone understands. Her eyes landed on Grace with dismissive assessment. I'm sure your little photographer friend understands too. This is fun, but it's not forever. Grace felt the words like physical blows. Little photographer friend. This is fun, but it's not forever. Everything she'd feared about her relationship with Lorenzo, spoken aloud by someone who clearly believed she belonged in his world, while Grace was just temporary entertainment. Don't talk to her like that. Lorenzo's voice turned dangerous, his body radiating barely controlled fury. Grace isn't temporary or entertainment. She's the woman I love, and you do well to show her respect. Valentina's mask slipped briefly, revealing hurt and anger before she recovered with practiced grace. Love? Lorenzo, don't be absurd. You barely know this woman. Love is what builds dynasties, creates legacies, unites families. What you have is infatuation that will fade the moment reality intrudes. She stepped closer to Lorenzo, her hand on his arm with familiar possession. We've known each other since childhood. Our families have been planning this union for decades. I understand your world, your responsibilities, your pressures. I can stand beside you through everything your position requires. Can she say the same? Grace watched the interaction feeling like an outsider, which she was despite Lorenzo's declarations of love. Valentina was right about one thing. She understood Lorenzo's world in ways Grace never would. She knew the business, the expectations, the rules of engagement in this life of wealth and power. What did Grace know except how to work a camera and pay bills? Go inside, Valentina, Lorenzo said coldly. Tell my mother we'll have dinner another time. Grace and I are leaving. Valentina's eyes hardened. This isn't over, Lorenzo. Your father made promises to my family. Promises that have financial and political implications you can't just ignore. Be realistic about what choosing her will cost you. She swept back into the house with injured dignity while Lorenzo stood rigid with barely suppressed rage. When he turned to Grace, his expression was equal parts apologetic and determined. I'm sorry you had to hear that. Valentina has always believed she's entitled to marry me because our fathers discussed it years ago. She's wrong. Is she wrong about the costs? Grace asked quietly. About promises your father made that have real implications? Lorenzo's silence was answer enough. There were costs, business relationships, family expectations, political alliances. Things Grace didn't understand but that clearly mattered in his world. "Take me home," she said, unable to bear another moment at the Romano estate. "Please, Lorenzo. Just take me home." The drive back to Grace's apartment was silent, tension thick between them. Lorenzo walked her to her door, his expression troubled but resolute. "Don't let Valentina's words convince you we're impossible," he said, fingers gentle on Grace's jaw. "She's bitter about losing something she never actually had. But her opinion doesn't matter. Only yours does. What if her being bitter has nothing to do with it?" Grace met his eyes, her own filled with unshed tears. "What if she's right that I can't handle your world, that I don't belong there? What if choosing me costs you too much?" Lorenzo's jaw tightened with frustration. "You're the only thing I can't afford to lose, Grace. Everything else, the business, the family approval, the social standing, means nothing without you. Why can't you believe that?" "Because it sounds too good to be true," Grace thought but didn't say aloud. "Because men like you don't choose women like me when there are women like Valentina available. Because I'm terrified of believing in us and then watching it all fall apart. I need time," she said instead. "To think, to process everything. Please understand, this is overwhelming." Lorenzo looked like he wanted to argue, but he nodded slowly, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Take the time you need, Kara. But remember, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not giving up on us, even if you're determined to find reasons why we can't work." After he left, Grace sat in her dark apartment replaying the afternoon's events. Francesca's warnings, Valentina's dismissal, the revelation about family arrangements and business implications. Everything confirmed what her insecurities had been screaming since she'd first gotten involved with Lorenzo. She didn't belong in his world, and staying there would only cause problems for everyone. Her phone buzzed with a message from Rachel. "How did dinner with the future in-laws go?" Grace stared at those words, future in-laws, and felt panic rising in her chest. This was moving too fast, getting too serious before she'd figured out if she could actually handle Lorenzo's complicated life. She needed space, perspective, time to think without his intense presence overwhelming her common sense. She texted back, "Complicated. Think I need a break from everything for a few days." Rachel's response was immediate. "Do not do something stupid like breaking up with him because you're scared." Grace ignored the message, turning off her phone and pulling blankets over her head, like they could block out the mess her life had become. She'd gone from simple freelance photographer to tangled in Romano family drama in less than 3 weeks. How had she let this happen? The next morning, Grace woke to someone pounding on her door. She dragged herself out of bed, expecting Rachel with coffee and tough love. Instead, she found Lorenzo's mother standing in the hallway, impeccably dressed despite the early hour. "Mrs. Romano." Grace clutched her robe closed, acutely aware of her messy hair and yesterday's makeup. "This is unexpected. May I come in?" Francesca's tone made it clear this wasn't really a request. Grace stepped aside, allowing the older woman into her small studio. Francesca's assessing gaze took in the modest space. Unmade bed, kitchen the size of a closet, second-hand furniture Grace had collected over years. "You have coffee?" she asked. Yes. Let me just..." Grace scrambled to make coffee with shaking hands while Francesca settled on the worn couch with surprising ease. When they both had steaming mugs, an awkward silence stretched until Francesca finally spoke. "I came to apologize," she said, surprising Grace. "Yesterday was handled poorly. I should have prepared you for Valentina's presence, should have made it clear from the beginning that I support Lorenzo's choice to be with you." Grace nearly dropped her coffee mug. "You support us?" "Of course." Francesca's expression softened. "I may have concerns about the complications, but I can see how Lorenzo looks at you. How he comes alive in ways I haven't seen since he was a boy. That matters more than any business arrangement his father made without my input." But Valentina seemed confident. "Valentina is operating under assumptions from old conversations," Francesca interrupted. "The truth is more complex. Yes, Lorenzo's father discussed the possibility of uniting our families through marriage. But he never formalized anything, and he died before those discussions progressed beyond possibility. Valentina's family chooses to interpret possibilities as promises because it benefits them. Grace processed this information, trying to separate truth from manipulation. So there's no actual engagement? No legally binding agreement, no. Francesca sipped her coffee. But there are expectations, Valentina's family believing Lorenzo will honor his father's wishes, business associates who've built plans assuming that union, social circles who see it as inevitable. Breaking from those expectations will cause disruption. Which brings us back to the original problem, Grace said. Me being with Lorenzo causes complications for everyone. Francesca set down her coffee, meeting Grace's eyes with surprising intensity. Let me tell you about my marriage to Lorenzo's father. It was arranged, good families, beneficial business merger, everything proper and traditional. And I was miserable for years because Carlo loved his business more than he could ever love me. He was a good provider, a strong leader, but he never looked at me the way Lorenzo looks at you. Her voice softened with memory and regret. I don't want that life for my son. I want him to have what Carlo and I never did. Real love, genuine partnership. Someone who sees him as more than a business asset. If you can give him that, then the complications are worth managing. Grace felt tears burning in her eyes. I'm not sure I'm strong enough to handle his world. Yesterday with Valentina, the way she looked at me like I was nothing, that's going to be my life if I stay with him. Always being judged, always being seen as not good enough. Then prove them wrong, Francesca said firmly. Show them that strength comes in many forms, that Lorenzo chose well when he chose you. But you cannot do that if you run every time things become difficult. After Francesca left, Grace sat with her words, feeling the weight of decision pressing down. She could walk away now, protect herself from future hurt, avoid complications she wasn't equipped to handle. Or she could fight for what she'd found with Lorenzo. Trust that love was worth the difficulties that came with it. Her phone buzzed with a message from Lorenzo. I know you need space, Cara. I'm trying to respect that. But please know I'm here whenever you're ready to talk. I love you. Grace stared at those 3 words. I love you. Sent without expectation of response, just honest statement of feeling. When had anyone loved her so unconditionally? Been willing to disrupt their entire world just to keep her in it? She typed back, I love you too. Can we talk tonight? His response was immediate. I'll be at your apartment at 7 with dinner and patience for whatever you need to say. That evening, Grace opened the door to find Lorenzo holding takeout containers and looking nervous in a way she'd never seen. They settled at her small table, picking at Thai food while tension built between them. I talked to your mother this morning, Grace began. She came here to explain things about Valentina and family expectations. Lorenzo's expression turned wary. What did she say? That she supports us. That complications are worth managing if we're really committed to each other. Grace took a deep breath, gathering courage. Lorenzo, I need to know something. Are you choosing me because you really want me? Or because you want to rebel against your father's plans? Because those are very different motivations. Lorenzo set down his fork, his dark eyes serious. I'm choosing you because the moment you walked into that gala, something clicked into place. Like I'd been waiting for you without knowing it. He reached across the table for her hand. My father's plans have nothing to do with this, Cara. If anything, they make my choice harder. But they don't change what I feel. Grace squeezed his fingers, feeling some of her fear begin to dissolve. I'm scared, she admitted. Scared of not being enough, of causing problems for you, of disappointing people who matter to you. But I'm more scared of walking away from something real because I was too afraid to try. Relief washed over Lorenzo's features. Then don't walk away. Stay and let me prove that we can handle whatever comes together. They spent the rest of the evening planning how to navigate his family's expectations, how to deal with Valentina and the Giordano family's disappointment, how to balance Grace's independence with the reality of being involved with someone as prominent as Lorenzo. It wasn't easy or simple, but talking through complications made them feel less overwhelming. I need to keep my photography career, Grace said firmly. I can't become just Lorenzo Romano's girlfriend and lose myself in your world. I would never want that, Lorenzo assured her. Your talent, your independence, those are things I love about you. We'll find balance, Bellissima. Over the following weeks they did find balance, albeit imperfectly. Grace continued taking photography assignments while slowly integrating into Lorenzo's life. She attended some family dinners, met his business associates, began understanding the complex web of relationships and expectations that governed his world. It wasn't always comfortable. Some people in Lorenzo's circle treated Grace with warmth and acceptance. Others made their disapproval clear through subtle dismissals and not-so-subtle comments about how different she was from women they'd expected Lorenzo to date. Valentina remained a constant presence at family and business events, her hostility barely masked by polite society manners. At a charity gala 3 weeks after the disastrous Sunday dinner, Grace stood beside Lorenzo in a borrowed designer gown, trying not to feel like an imposter. He kept her close all evening, his hand never leaving the small of her back, introducing her to important people with obvious pride. "You're doing beautifully," he murmured during a quiet moment. Ignore the stares and whispers, they mean nothing. But Grace couldn't ignore the way Valentina watched them from across the ballroom, her expression calculating. When Lorenzo was pulled into a conversation with business associates, Valentina materialized at Grace's side with predatory timing. "You're quite the novelty," Valentina said, voice low enough that nearby guests couldn't hear. "Lorenzo's little experiment in slumming. How long do you think it will last?" Grace lifted her chin, refusing to show how the words cut. "Lorenzo and I are happy together. That's all that matters." "Happy?" Valentina's laugh was cold. "He's happy with the idea of you. The excitement of dating someone so different from his usual world. But reality will set in eventually, Grace. You'll grow tired of being judged, of never quite belonging. And he'll grow tired of defending choices his family and business associates question." Before Grace could respond, Lorenzo returned, his expression darkening as he read the tension between them. "Valentina, is there a problem?" "Not at all," Valentina said smoothly, her mask of civility sliding back into place. "I was just welcoming Grace to our world, making sure she understands what she's gotten herself into." She walked away with elegant menace while Lorenzo pulled Grace close, his jaw tight with barely suppressed anger. "What did she say to you?" "Nothing that isn't true," Grace admitted. "I am different from women in your world. I do get judged. People do question why you're with me. Their opinions are irrelevant," Lorenzo growled. "You're mine, Grace. That's the only thing that matters." But his possessive certainty couldn't quite erase the doubt Valentina had planted. Grace smiled and pretended to be fine for the rest of the gala, but inside, insecurity gnawed at her confidence. The following week, things came to a head in the worst possible way. Lorenzo's company was finalizing a major business deal that required board approval. Grace knew the meeting was important, knew Lorenzo had been working toward this acquisition for months. What she didn't know until Lorenzo came to her apartment that evening, his expression devastated, was that the deal had fallen through. "What happened?" Grace asked, pulling him inside. Lorenzo collapsed on her couch, head in his hands. "The Giordano family happened. They hold significant influence with 3 board members, influence they used to vote against the acquisition unless I agreed to honor my father's arrangement with Valentina." Grace's stomach dropped. "They're blackmailing you?" "Essentially." Lorenzo's laugh was bitter. "Marry Valentina or watch them systematically dismantle everything I've built. They made it very clear that my personal choices have professional consequences." "Oh God." Grace sank beside him, guilt crashing over her. "This is because of me. Because you're with me instead of Valentina." Lorenzo pulled her close despite his obvious pain. "This is because the Giordanos are manipulative bastards willing to use business as leverage for personal arrangements. You didn't cause this, Cara." But Grace knew better. If Lorenzo had simply gone along with his father's plans, if he'd married Valentina as everyone expected, this wouldn't be happening. His choice to be with Grace was costing him professionally, hurting the business he'd spent years building. "What are you going to do?" she asked, though she already dreaded the answer. "I'm going to fight them," Lorenzo said with quiet fury. "Find new investors, restructure the deal, work around their influence. It will take time, cost money, possibly damage other business relationships. But I'm not giving in to blackmail, and I'm certainly not giving you up." Over the next few weeks, Grace watched Lorenzo work himself to exhaustion trying to salvage the deal. He was gone early and home late, meetings and calls consuming every moment. She tried to be supportive, bringing him dinner when he worked late, listening when he needed to vent frustration. But the strain was evident. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, tension radiated from his shoulders, and their stolen moments together became increasingly rare. At Sunday dinner with his mother, Grace finally voiced the guilt that had been building. Francesca had asked her to arrive early to help prepare food, claiming she enjoyed having another woman in the kitchen. They worked side by side making pasta, the domestic normalcy soothing Grace's frayed nerves. "Lorenzo looks exhausted," Francesca observed, rolling out dough with practiced ease. "This business with the Giordanos is taking its toll." "I know." Grace's voice was thick with guilt. "Mrs. Romano, if I stepped away, if I ended things with Lorenzo, would the Giordanos back off? Would they let the deal go through?" Francesca's hand stilled on the pasta. She turned to Grace with surprising intensity. "You're thinking of leaving him?" "I'm thinking of saving him from consequences of choosing me," Grace corrected. "He's losing business opportunities, damaging relationships with family and associates, exhausting himself trying to fight battles that wouldn't exist if he just married Valentina like everyone wanted. And you think he'd thank you for that sacrifice?" Francesca's tone turned sharp. "You think walking away from him now, when he's fighting so hard to keep you, would be some noble gesture? It would destroy him, Grace. Break something in him that might never heal. But he's miserable." "He's frustrated," Francesca corrected. "There's a difference. Yes, the Giordanos are making his professional life difficult. Yes, some business associates question his choices. But Lorenzo is a grown man who understands the consequences of his decisions. He chose you with open eyes, Cara. Don't disrespect that choice by deciding you know better than he does what's good for him." Tears burned Grace's eyes. "I just want him to be happy." "Then stay and fight beside him," Francesca said firmly. "Show the Giordanos and everyone else that you're strong enough to weather the difficulties. Prove that Lorenzo chose well when he chose you. But if you run now, if you break his heart because you think you're protecting him, that's the one thing I cannot forgive." Grace spent the rest of that day thinking about Francesca's words, about the difference between protecting someone and abandoning them when things got hard. By the time Lorenzo arrived at her apartment that evening, she'd made a decision. "I talked to your mother today," she said as he settled wearily on her couch, "about the Giordanos and the business situation." Lorenzo's expression grew wary. "What did she say?" "That running away from you now would hurt you more than any business deal failing." Grace sat beside him, taking his hands. "She's right. I've been so focused on not causing you problems that I forgot what actually matters. Being your partner through difficulties, not just the easy moments." Relief washed over Lorenzo's face. "You're not leaving?" "I'm not leaving," Grace confirmed. "I'm staying and fighting beside you however I can. The Giordanos want me gone? Too bad. They're stuck with me." Lorenzo pulled her into his arms, holding tight like she might disappear. "God, I love you. I was terrified you were about to tell me it was over, that I'd have to watch you walk away again." "Never again," Grace promised against his chest. "You're stuck with me, Lorenzo Romano. For better or worse." His kiss was desperate, grateful, filled with relief and love in equal measure. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lorenzo rested his forehead against hers. "I have news," he said. "Found new investors willing to back the acquisition without Giordano influence. The deal goes to vote again next week, and this time we have the numbers to pass it." Grace's face split with a genuine smile. "That's incredible. Lorenzo, you did it." "We did it," he corrected. "You believed in us when I was ready to burn everything down in frustration. That faith gave me strength to keep fighting." Over the following months, Grace and Lorenzo built something stronger than just romance. They built partnership. She learned to navigate his world with increasing confidence, creating a photography business that served high society clients while maintaining artistic integrity. He learned to step back from business occasionally, finding balance between empire building and personal life. Valentina eventually accepted defeat, announcing her engagement to a business associate from Milan. At the engagement party, which Lorenzo insisted on attending to publicly show there were no hard feelings, Valentina pulled Grace aside for a private conversation. "I was wrong about you," she admitted, the admission clearly difficult. I thought you were temporary distraction. Turns out you're the real thing. Grace recognized the peace offering for what it was, Valentina finally moving on, accepting that Lorenzo had made his choice. Thank you for saying that. I know this wasn't easy for you. Love rarely is, Valentina said with sad wisdom. But for what it's worth, I think Lorenzo chose well. You make him happy in ways I never could have. 6 months after that first gala, Lorenzo took Grace back to the same ballroom where they'd met. She thought they were attending another charity event. But when they arrived, the space was empty except for candles and a single violinist playing soft Italian music. Lorenzo, what is this? Grace asked, confused. He led her to the center of the ballroom, right where they'd first spotted each other across the crowded room. Then he dropped to one knee, pulling a ring box from his jacket pocket. Grace Blake, he said, voice thick with emotion. You walked into my life and changed everything. Made me laugh, made me fight, made me believe that love was worth any complication. You challenged me to be better, to build a life instead of just an empire. I can't imagine my future without you in it. He opened the ring box, revealing a stunning diamond that caught the candlelight. Will you marry me, Bellissima? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that choosing you was the best decision I ever made? Grace's tears fell freely as she nodded, unable to speak through the emotions clogging her throat. Yes, she finally managed. Yes, absolutely yes. Lorenzo slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and kissed her with tender passion. They danced alone in the ballroom where everything had started, Grace's head on his shoulder, both of them aware that their journey had been complicated and difficult, but ultimately worth every struggle. The wedding took place a year later in a beautiful ceremony that balanced Lorenzo's family traditions with Grace's simpler preferences. Francesca cried through the entire event, repeatedly telling anyone who would listen that her son had finally found real happiness. Grace's parents, who'd initially been skeptical about her relationship with Lorenzo, admitted he was everything they could hope for in a son-in-law. As Grace walked down the aisle toward Lorenzo waiting at the altar, she thought about how close she'd come to letting fear destroy something precious. How easy it would have been to run, to convince herself they were impossible, to choose safety over the terrifying vulnerability of real love. But she'd stayed, fought, believed. And now, looking into Lorenzo's eyes as they exchanged vows, Grace knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice. I love you, she whispered as he slipped the wedding band onto her finger. For better or worse, through all complications and difficulties. For better or worse, Lorenzo agreed, his voice rough with emotion. You're mine, Grace. Always. Always, she echoed. 2 years later, Grace stood in the nursery of their home, a beautiful brownstone in the West Village, the same one where they'd first made love, gently rocking their newborn daughter. Isabella had her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn chin, perfect in every way. Lorenzo appeared in the doorway, his expression soft with wonder as he watched his wife and daughter. Even after 2 years of marriage, Grace still took his breath away, especially now, glowing with maternal love, their baby in her arms. How are my girls? He asked softly, crossing to wrap his arms around them both. Perfect, Grace said, leaning into his warmth. Though I think Isabella has your personality. She refuses to sleep unless she's getting exactly what she wants. Lorenzo laughed quietly, pressing a kiss to Grace's temple. She gets that from both of us. We're both stubborn as hell. They stood together in the peaceful nursery, their daughter sleeping peacefully between them, and Grace reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The fear and complications, the family drama and business pressures, the moments she'd almost run because being loved so completely terrified her. But love had conquered everything. Fear, doubt, social expectations, business blackmail, and her own insecurities. Lorenzo had promised to claim her completely that first night, to be her first and last. He'd kept that promise in every way that mattered. No regrets. Lorenzo murmured against her hair, as though reading her thoughts. Grace looked up at him, this powerful man who'd torn down every defense to love her, who'd fought his entire world to keep her. Not a single one, she said honestly. You. Only that I didn't find you sooner. He kissed her softly, carefully, mindful of the sleeping baby between them. But I have you now. Have our daughter. Have everything I didn't know I needed until you walked into that gala and turned my world upside down. I love you, Grace whispered. Always. Always, Lorenzo echoed, and in that moment, surrounded by the family they built despite every obstacle, Grace knew that their love story, complicated, difficult, beautiful, was just beginning.